welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Okay, so President Trump's second term is underway, and his first major foreign trip is, well, it's a big one. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE.
Absolutely. A region that's incredibly active right now, diplomatically, financially.
Exactly. Big promises being made.
Yeah.
So we've pulled together a stack of sources to really get into it for you.
Yeah, we're looking at a CNN transcript for the sort of immediate news flow.
Right.
Then there's a CSIS press briefing giving us that deeper context.
Essential context.
And a Fox News report, too, which really focuses on the investment side of things.
Right, the money angle. So our mission for you today, we want to cut through the headlines, really get at the core dynamics playing out here. We're talking potential trade shifts with China, those delicate Iran nuclear talks, the whole complex Israeli-Palestinian situation.
Mm-hmm. All seen through the lens of Trump's trip to these really key Gulf countries.
Okay, let's start with the trip itself.
Yeah.
CSIS experts seem to see the Gulf as, well, a comfortable spot for Trump.
Yeah, it's interesting. John Alterman at CSIS, he basically calls it a happy place for Trump.
A happy place.
Meaning, leaders there are likely eager to make deals, offer praise. It's not like, ugh.
Not like going to Mexico or Canada first, maybe.
Yeah.
Where you might expect protests. Daniel Byman at CSIS mentioned that contrast.
Exactly. Byman pointed that out. Less contentious, probably fewer protests than those traditional first stops.
And it makes you think about the contrast with Biden, right? Fox News mentioned his cooler relationship, especially with the Saudis after Khashoggi.
Right. Trump seems to be signaling a return to that more transactional approach, maybe warmer.
Which raises questions, doesn't it? About leverage on things like human rights.
It does. And CNN pointed out, starting in Riyadh, just like his first term.
Yeah.
That's not accidental.
No, it sends a message reaffirming that relationship.
Definitely deliberate.
Okay, let's talk about the money, because the numbers are just huge. Saudi Arabia's pledges.
They're really striking. Both Fox and CNN are reporting $600 billion pledged from Saudi Arabia, investments in the U.S.
$600 billion, what kind of areas?
Weapons, tech, AI, even the U.S. stock market. And Trump himself, according to CNN, he suggested it could go higher, maybe $1 trillion.
$1 trillion? Wow.
Yeah, the scale is massive, raises big questions about these long-term economic ties being built.
And the UAE, they're not holding back either, are they?
Not at all. If anything, they're talking even bigger numbers. CNN and Fox both mentioned this $1.4 trillion commitment.
$1.4 trillion. Over how long?
Over 10 years. And their focus is really sharp. AI, semiconductors, manufacturing, energy. They clearly want to lead in those fields.
Makes sense. And Qatar's got a big deal cooking, too, with Boeing.
That's right. CNN confirms they're finalizing a deal, 100 Boeing wide-body planes.
Wow. So that's a huge win for Boeing, for the U.S., but also shows Qatar's clout, right?
Absolutely. Big economic deal, but it also highlights their role as a major aviation player and business hub.
Now, CNN also brought up something potentially sensitive. The Trump family's business interests in the region.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the picture CNN painted. It inevitably brings up those potential conflict of interest questions.
What specifically did they mention?
Well, things like real estate, golf properties connected to the family in Riyadh and Doha, and Eric Trump's crypto stuff, a branded tower in Dubai. So naturally, people ask if personal business could, influence policy with these countries.
That's a fair question. And there's this kind of paradox, too, isn't there? Fox News mentioned it. And all this investment money comes from oil, mostly.
Right.
But Trump has usually pushed for lower global energy prices. How does that square?
That's a really sharp point. Fox flagged that tension. The Gulf states are making these huge commitments, but their main source of wealth, oil, could actually be hurt if Trump succeeds in pushing prices down.
So a tricky balancing act for them.
A very delicate one. Could affect their ability to follow through long term.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the region itself. Saudi Arabia is changing. Vision 2030 comes up a lot in the CNN and CSIS reports. What's the core idea there?
Vision 2030, yeah, it's really ambitious. Both sources highlight it. It's basically Saudi Arabia's grand plan to transform their economy, their society.
The main goal being less reliance on oil.
That's key. Diversification away from oil, big infrastructure projects, developing new industries, but also social reforms are part of it too.
And Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, he seems to be projecting more confidence, according to CNN.
Yeah, the reporting suggests he's really stepping up, feeling more assertive as he drives these changes and navigates, the whole regional picture.
But one area where they seem pretty firm, Saudi Arabia, is Israel normalization.
Definitely. CNN had that direct quote from the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan al Saud.
What did you say exactly?
Basically, normalization with Israel is off the table until there's a resolution for Palestinian statehood. Full stop.
So that's a clear line in the sand, different from where the U.S. might have been pushing before.
It certainly highlights a potential point of friction or at least a difference in priorities right now.
Okay, what about Qatar? They seem to be playing a different kind of game.
Yeah, Qatar's role is really interesting. CNN points to them being the central mediator,
In the Israel-Hamas conflict.
right, involved there, but also just being a major business and diplomatic hub. That Boeing deal fits that picture. It feels like a more maybe nuanced approach to influence.
That's confrontational, perhaps?
Possibly, yeah.
And the UAE. We mentioned their investment focus, but they're really going hard on tech, especially AI.
Oh, absolutely. They want to be a global AI hub. CNN mentioned partnerships with Microsoft, OpenAI,
Big names.
huge names, and they're really keen on getting those advanced NVIDIA chips. It shows a serious commitment to leading in advanced tech.
Okay, now the elephant in the room, maybe, Iran. Like, Fox News mentioned U.S.-Iran nuclear talks are still happening, sort of in the background of this trip.
That's right. The fourth round of those indirect talks in Oman, Fox noted they happen around the same time as Trump's trip. No major breakthrough reported, though.
But talks are ongoing.
They are. And interestingly, Fox also reported Iran's foreign minister made these unannounced trips to Saudi Arabia and Qatar just before Trump arrived.
Laying groundwork. Or just coincidence.
Hard to say for sure, but the timing is noteworthy.
And the CSIS analysis suggests the Gulf states themselves feel differently about these talks compared to, say, 2015.
That's a key insight from CSIS. Many Gulf states seem, well, more supportive of the U.S. talking to Iran now.
Why the change?
It seems to boil down to a fear of actual war, a growing worry about a direct conflict with Iran and just how devastating that could be for the whole region.
So talking is better than the alternative.
That appears to be the calculation for many of them now, yes?
And we're even seeing some direct warming between Gulf states and Iran. CNN and CSIS mentioned this.
Yes, that's a noticeable shift. CNN specifically flagged the Iranian foreign minister visiting Riyadh recently, called it unprecedented compared to how things were in 2015.
So relations are thawing, at least somewhat.
Seems that way. A definite change in tone and interaction.
But there are still worries about Iran's proxies, right? Fox News quoted Jonathan Bass on the IRGC.
Right, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Bass's comment highlighted those ongoing concerns that Iran's network, the IRGC especially, can still destabilize things.
So even with talks, that threat perception is still there.
It is, although CSIS did offer some nuance there, too. They suggested maybe Hezbollah is weaker now, Syria isn't the same backyard for Iran it once was.
Interesting. So the picture is complex. And the Trump administration, they are interested in a new Iran deal. CNN mentioned that.
Yeah, CNN alluded to that interest. And CSIS even floated the idea that the U.S. might be flexible on Iran's uranium enrichment.
Flexible on enrichment, that would be a big shift.
Potentially, yes, if it's part of getting a revised deal done.
And quickly, the Houthis in Yemen. Trump claimed a ceasefire involving U.S. ships. CNN had that.
He did say that in the transcript, yeah. That Houthi attacks on U.S. ships had stopped. CNN also said talks are ongoing, hosted by Oman.
But the Gulf states maybe aren't fully on board with just talking.
CSIS suggested their preference is more towards keeping sustained pressure on the Houthis. So maybe a bit of a disconnect there.
Okay, wow. Now, switching tracks completely, a U.S.-China trade breakthrough. This seemed to come out of nowhere.
It was definitely a major headline. CNN reported this agreement reached in Geneva, apparently.
What's the deal?
A big rollback on tariffs. Drastic, they said. For 90 days initially, both sides talking about meeting a mutually beneficial relationship.
90 days, so a temporary truce. Kevin Hassett, quoted by CNN, sounded pretty optimistic, though. Fresh start, fixing supply chains.
Yeah, Hassett used terms like historic, fresh start. He seemed hopeful it could unsnarl those gummed-up supply chains we've all felt.
But not everyone's buying it. CNN quoted a Democrat, Jake Auchincloss.
Right. Representative Auchincloss expressed skepticism. His take was sort of, Trump creates chaos with tariffs, then claims victory when he eases them, a cycle of uncertainty.
But the markets liked it. CNN said stocks jumped.
They did. The immediate market reaction reported by CNN was positive, a noticeable surge on the news.
And how did Trump himself frame it? The CNN transcript had quotes.
He called it a total reset, with China and really emphasize opening up China for American business as being, quote, the biggest thing.
So he sees it as a major win.
Clearly, he put a lot of weight on it.
Okay, another really sensitive issue, hostages. Hamas announced the release of Eden Alexander, the last known living American hostage. CNN reported this.
Yes, a very significant humanitarian development reported by CNN. Hamas framed it as a step towards a ceasefire.
And Trump's reaction. CNN and Fox both covered it.
He called it a step taken in good faith and monumental, a very positive assessment from him.
Now, CNN noted the U.S. seemed to negotiate this directly, bypassing Israel.
That's what the reporting indicated, yes,
Mhm.
through Qatar and Egypt as mediators, directly with Hamas.
What does that tell us?
Well, it could suggest a shift in the U.S. approach, maybe frustration with the previous process, or just the complexity of the U.S.-Israel dynamic on this right now.
Because Netanyahu's response was quite different, wasn't it? CNN reported him saying Israel isn't committed to a ceasefire for this release.
Exactly. A clear difference in messaging. Netanyahu saying operations continue, negotiations happen, under fire, not linking the release to a ceasefire commitment.
So diverging messages there.
Yeah.
And CNN also mentioned someone named Steve Witkoff played a role. Trump praised him, too.
Yes, both the CNN report and Trump's own comments credited Steve Witkoff. Apparently, he was involved in securing Alexander's release, but also in earlier efforts, like a ceasefire back in January, and even some talks with Iran in Oman.
Interesting figure. Okay, so lots of moving parts, big announcements. But the CSIS experts, they sounded a note of caution. Potential missed opportunities.
That's right. Their briefing suggested maybe a focus on the quick wins the deals, the investments.
The headlines.
Yeah, perhaps at the expense of a deeper, more coherent long-term strategy for the whole region. They worried about a lack of coordinated policy across all the hotspots: Syria, Gaza, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, Iraq.
Just too many separate fires.
Yeah.
Not enough of a unified plan.
Yeah, that seemed to be the concern. CSIS highlighted this lack of a clear, unified U.S. policy for the Middle East overall, which, they argue, creates confusion.
And underlying it all, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict just grinds on, doesn't it? No real movement towards a political solution.
Exactly. That remains this major unresolved issue, casting a shadow over everything else, a huge impediment to real regional stability.
And one last point from CSIS, Trump mentioning renaming the Persian Gulf. They saw that as potentially problematic.
Yeah, they flagged that. A sensitive point, especially for Iran. CSIS cautioned it could provoke a negative reaction, maybe complicate diplomatic efforts unnecessarily. Naming conventions matter in geopolitics.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. This Gulf tour. It feels like it's about locking in economic ties, navigating these really complex regional rivalries, Iran, Israel, Palestine, and definitely about Trump showcasing diplomatic wins.
Right, and then you throw in that U.S.-China trade truce, it just adds another whole layer of complexity to the global picture.
So for you listening, the key things to track are probably the sheer size of these investment numbers.
Incredible sums.
The very delicate dance around Iran, its nuclear program, its regional role.
Which seems to be shifting, subtly.
And these different paths countries are taking towards trying to find some stability.
Yeah, the contrasting approaches really stand out.
It leaves you with a lot of questions, though. Like, what happens long-term with these huge investments? Can the U.S. really juggle its Gulf allies and Israel effectively?
And that China trade truce, is it real? Will it last?
So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. As President Trump courts the Gulf with these big economic promises, how does that actually reshape power in the Middle East and maybe globally?
And, how much do those seemingly smaller things, like what you call a body of water, actually end up mattering in this really high-stakes geopolitical game?